Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams Tea Podcast, where we spill the jams and spin the tea, and I fucked it up again. We're gonna move right past that because it's fucking cold outside and I don't know how to think anymore. This week, we are going to be reviewing two new albums, just like we do every single week. This week, we are covering the War on Drugs little podcast darling band, their new album, I Don't Live Here Anymore. Big fucking deal. And also, band that Tyler and I do not shut up about. I'm convinced that we are two of the three fans of Kayo Dot, the other being Zach, of course, and that's it. We are going to be talking about their new album, Moss Grew on the Swords and Plowshares alike. Thanks, guys. I really love your title. Cool. And of course, we have a record club this week, my recommended record, which is Linkin Park's Meteora. Very excited to talk about that, so stay tuned for it. Kind of an unofficial follow-up to our video on 3 Days Grace. I think I see those as sister reviews in many respects that I'm sure we'll get into. And good gosh golly, we've had so much shit happen this week with videos.
We finished the 1991 retrospective.
It's fucking over. We capped it off with Loveless, which go check that out. Good discussion we had talking about one of the biggest sort of alternative releases in 1991. So go check that out. We also, of course, talked about Tyler's recommended record last week, Emergency and I by the Dismemberment Plan, which is also a great fucking discussion. And we covered JPEG Mafia and Every Time I Die. And I did a worst to best on another band we don't shut the fuck up about, which is Ghost, for Halloween. So go see that if you haven't. To sort of tack on to the addendum of new channel content is that you may have noticed a little something. If you've watched our videos recently, there is now a little join button down there next to where it says subscribe. This happened because we, of course, finally got partnered as of recently, and we got access to some stuff that people on YouTube who are partnered can access, namely being rewards and tiers. Basically, this is YouTube's built-in Patreon thing. And currently we have one tier that we've made, which is not a finalized thing yet, because obviously we kind of want to probe around, see what we want to do with this. But we do have a $1 tier right now that gives you certain perks that YouTube builds into its shit. If you sign up for it, should you be so generous, we would appreciate it. You get access to little badges you can use and certain exclusive emojis that we're going to be adding to. You get priority when it comes to responding to comments in the comments section. There's tons of other stuff that we want to, use to incentivize, but we're kind of gonna play the field a little bit. So if you are a fan of our content, then we would humbly request and be infinitely grateful if you chose to support us. It would help us. It would help the show, help give you more of that sweet content.
Yeah, obviously it's something that you should only do if you're able to, obviously, but we do put a lot of hours into this every week, and it's all for the love of it. Essentially, we get no real sort of compensation.
As nice as ad revenue is,
yeah.
If we went by that as a viable career path, each of us would be making about as much money as a kid in a Chinese sweatshop.
What am I supposed to do with 0.3 cents, YouTube? What am I supposed to do with that?
Divided by 4 people? No, but like the most rewarding thing we can possibly get is anything that shows love for us, whether it is a donation or whether it is a comment or whether it is a like or a subscription. Anything that you feel comfortable doing to support us in any way is greatly appreciated. Honestly, it means more to us than any ad revenue ever could. So yeah, and I also just want to put in a personal apology for if you've been like me watching videos on the channel recently and having to deal with ads from crypto bros and from that one lady who says you can make a lot of money selling books on Amazon. If anyone else gets her a lot, I get her a lot. She's
falsehood. Complete falsehood.
I would
fabrication.
Know. Yeah, it seems to be like a pyramid scheme where you sell other people's books. It's really fucking stupid. Anyway, Yes.
least
So
it's-
thank
at
you if
least
you've been putting up with
Independent
ads.
author scene, everybody.
Thank
Please
you if
buy
you've
my
been putting up
books,
with
I'm
ads on
poor.
this channel. We do appreciate it. Um,
At least there's no PragerU ads.
that's
yet.
true. That's true. Yeah, we
In
obviously.
fact, censor me saying that, just so the algorithm doesn't pick up on it potentially.
It's funny you mentioned that, Morgan. I got a notification the other day, and I can't remember for what video it was on. No, it was for Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And I think it got filtered and like blocked because it didn't show up in the comment section. But there was somebody who commented on that video, and I quote, "Lefty cucks, what the fuck?" That's it. That's literally it. On our video on Red Hot Chili Peppers Blood Sugar Sex. And look, we are a bunch of lefty cucks.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that's a fair enough review.
That was not relevant.
You know what?
Yeah, I mean,
I was just racking my brains to think like, yeah, we are, but like, I don't know how you would get that from that video. And then I realized it was because I called. No. It was probably because I called Sir Psycho Sexy an ACAB anthem because there's a verse where Anthony Kiedis raps about being sexually assaulted by a cop. And then
saying what's up and suck my dick.
Yeah, so that's probably why we incurred the wrath of this person, for which I'm invariably grateful. Yeah,
it's
go
so
off.
Fucking funny to just like the syntax of that comment. Lefty cucks, what the fuck? It's just like what did you expect, man?
Sounds like if you deliver that right, it sounds like a Denzel Curry verse.
Lefty cucks, what the fuck?
There you go.
What the fuck is the difference? Okay, well, I think we've plugged all we need to plug for now. Yeah, so let's sort of get into the main meat of not the main meat of the episode. I'm stupid. Let's get into our first segment, what we've been listening to. I should mention, obviously, as you will have noticed, August is not with us this week. August has a lot going on in his life, as you have been able to tell, but he will he will definitely be back with us next week because we have a very special record club planned for next week that I'm not going to give any hints at, but just trust me, it's going to be worth it. So yeah, August will return, but for now, it's just the three of us, a bit more of a low-key episode. Let's get into what we've been listening to for the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I gotta kick off with this particular tidbit because at this point, how can I not? I have, of fucking course, have been listening to a lot of the new Porcupine Tree single. Oh, that's so good to say. The new Porcupine Tree single. Oh, something I never, ever thought I was going to say.
I've listened to it at least 15 times, and it still hasn't really dawned on me yet.
I got paid yesterday and pre-ordered the vinyl, and I still haven't quite registered that it's a real thing that's happening. But yes, indeed, if you have missed it,
I think it's
my favorite band. Oh,
I think my brain is just not allowing me to feel that much emotion just yet.
I honestly, it's like a defense mechanism because it's like,
yeah,
like Brockhampton coming out with that new album. They were just like, oh, it's 2 weeks away, and I was just like, oh, well, I don't have to wait all that much. So like, my brain didn't even really like get hyped or anything. It was just like, oh, new music's coming, cool. But this is coming out in June. I think June like 6th or something like that. But next year, we are in fact getting the Porcupine Tree reunion album. Steven Wilson, Gavin motherfucking Harrison, and is Barbieri involved too? Is that the third?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, Colin Edwin, the bassist, legendary prog bassist Colin Edwin, is not coming back. I think he's touring with someone else or is doing his solo stuff right now. So I'm pretty sure that's why. But Steven has used a great session bassist to tour with for his solo stuff, and I think they're using him. But Steven's always wrote most of the bass parts in Porcupine Tree anyway. So I'm not exactly like, oh no.
The first fucking thing you notice about Haradan is how fucking crunchy and sick that bass is. So I don't think there's
that's like a fucking jazz fusion bass line. Stupid.
Yep. It sounds fucking incredible. And I was also thrilled to learn that it is in like a best case scenario situation, is that when I listened to it, I was just like, it is a miracle how this song sounds like it came off right the edges of Fear of a Blank Planet and The Incident, which are their 2 last albums. And I'm like, this sounds like where they were headed anyway. It's amazing. Like they haven't even lost a step. And then they were just like, in the press release, they were like, yeah, Harridan has been on a hard drive unfinished forever, but we recorded it in like 2011 or 12, I think they said, and it's just been there and they just didn't finish it. So the new album is actually going to be a combination of like refined and updated demos from those sessions and completely new material. So I get a fair mix of old Porcupine Tree and whatever the fuck new Porcupine Tree is. So I mean, like I literally have nothing to complain about. This is just a best case scenario in every way. Yeah, the single itself fucking slaps. I love it. Can't wait to hear what this is even gonna sound or be like. I'm very thrilled also that it has like a bunch of bonus tracks that are confirmed as well, so it's like you get more shit. So I mean, this is just like the old albums, because there's a handful of them that just came, like I know that The Incident came with like a second disc that has like 5 bonus tracks on it, and I think In Absentia did 2 on a later version, so that's also dope. Just new material. I'm fucking happy. And to celebrate, naturally, I went and I tracked down every, and I mean every single release the band has ever had. I'm talking singles, I'm talking EPs, live albums, compilations, fucking anything you can possibly fathom. Everything on Rate Your Music, I went and I found and downloaded each of them. That might be for a project that I'm doing, perhaps, maybe. But of course, to celebrate, I listened to a couple Porcupine Tree projects, notably one I'll shout out, which is Metanoia. Metanoia is a record that is it's an album. It's like a full-length album, but it's mostly improvisational. That said, the thing about Metanoia is that it's sort of them operating like at the peak of their 90s power in terms of synergy. So it doesn't even really sound like, like in the way that you might expect something like it to. But everyone in the band is so in sync and so in lockstep with each other that it just manages to feel like Porcupine Tree doing the sort of ambient prog shit that they would do on earlier albums, or even on something like Signify, for example, because I believe this was right in between Signify and Stupid Dream. So it's basically them just going all in on their ambient shit, and it's a really good record. I mean, obviously not exactly as good as the canon Porcupine Tree shit, but I mean, it's just like you can tell that Steven had some, background in making ambient music and what have you. And there's like each track on the record has at least one of the members of the band showing off their incredible fucking skills. On the note of preparing for 2021 or 2022 releases, don't know what year it is, it's fine, is that I was listening to the singles for the upcoming release from Zeal and Ardor. Their self-titled is coming out next year, very early next year, I think February. And I listened to all of those singles. You might remember, if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, we actually reviewed Stranger Fruit. It was one of my record clubs because I love that album. I think it's a perfect album. I've listened to it more than maybe any other black metal album in existence, just because it's so fucking tight and unique and cool and awesome. So I listened to that again, and everything I said before about that album is still so fucking true. But oh my God, these singles on the self-titled are something else, man. There's a song on there called Run. That is the best black metal song I have heard in a long, long fucking time. This shit, like, I mean, obviously, the Stranger Fruit is an album that hits you heavy with shit like Fire of Motion. But this song is something else entirely. Like, this shit sounds straight up evil. The fucking lead vocalist, the fucking frontman of that band, whose name I will not begin to pronounce because I will butcher the shit out of it, he is going so hard on his different inflections and voices, like clean singing, growling, demonic shit. It's insane. Listening to it it is thrilling. I can't think of, I think the last time I heard something that like brutally intense was the clipping song Club Down from There Existed an Addiction to Blood, which it's got the same intensity that has, where it's just like overpowering industrial hellishness that feels like it's gonna like just fucking squash you. awesome. So yeah, I've been listening to a lot of that just because I want to prepare myself for it. I'm really excited. I've been getting into an artist that's been recommended to me by podcast friend Zach a bunch of times, which is Grouper. And I've listened to Observer and Ruins. And Grouper is interesting. She's like a sort of ambient slowcore artist that combines a lot of like there's a lot of like dense and noisy palettes on her stuff, but it's all still very spacious and pretty, to the point where her project Ruins, which I prefer Observer to it right now, but Ruins is interesting from like a structural level of just like I didn't really anticipate what it was going for based on the president of Observer, and I want to listen to that more so I can like properly understand that project. But it reminded me a lot of Chelsea Wolfe's technical debut album, The Grime and the Glow, and how it's like really lo-fi and like kind of like folky, but it has that really heavy emphasis on like ambience. And it's beautiful. She has an amazing singing voice. She's a phenomenal lyricist. A lot of like dense shit there, and Observer is just a beautiful, gorgeous album. Highly recommend if you're a fan of ambient shit.
I'll co-sign, and I'll jump in to say, I've been a fan of Grouper for a long time. I remember when Ruins came out in 2014. It was still, I think, probably, if not the one of the most listened to albums for me that year. Because I just would have it on a loop so often. Like I would go to sleep listening to it. Like I feel like that record is just kind of like just inside of my DNA now. Like just the way it's recorded, just the gentleness of the piano ballads. There's one song where you can hear a microwave beep at the end of it, because she was just recording it in her home, and she just decided to use that take. And then with the song Holding on that album, it's just like it's one of the saddest songs about being lonely and needing love that I've ever heard. And it's just so heartbreaking. And then like the last part of the album where it's just drone, and the last track Native Ear, and it feels like I'm literally like my whole body is just disintegrated. Like that the experience of that record is just something else. Man, it just really transports me. And yeah, I'd also recommend, if I were to shout out another of her albums as a recommendation, two quick recommendations. I don't want to overwhelm with Rex, but one I'll recommend is the album Dragging a Dead Deer Up a Hill, which came out just before Alien Observer. And that record is a really good, it's kind of like a good sort of, it's much closer to Alien Observer than it is to Ruins, but it's kind of like a meeting point of the two in the sense that there is a bit more sort of variation than either of those two records individually have. And it also has one of her greatest songs on it, which is Heavy Water. And I also recommend, much easier to get into, the EP that she put out in 2016 called Paradise Valley. It's only 8 minutes long. It is the best release she's ever put out. It's utterly amazing. It's 8 minutes. It's really quick. Put it on. Right. You will just melt. It has like a 3.97 on Rate Your Music, and you'll immediately see why when you put it on. It's just like utter perfection. So yeah, Paradise Valley and Ruins are the two big ones for me. I'm a little, I mentioned this last week, I'm a little disappointed that I can't really get into like her new album as much as I'd like to, but I'd say if you are digging into her music, don't overlook it purely because of that, because a lot of people will like it more than me. You might like it more than me. She's a really interesting and soft and tender but beautiful artist who knows how to use atmospherics, silence, but also distortion and noise really, really well. And her voice is just honey.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. I want to spend more time with it just because I feel like that's the thing, is that like it's a really minimal sound that she plays with, but at the same time, every single part of her sound is specifically designed to evoke that one feeling of like loneliness that she goes for. Like Observer is like floating through fucking space. It's amazing. But yeah, I also listened to an album that I think does not get its due, and I will say a very hot take about. I'm sure that a lot of that you two specifically will probably not disagree with, but a lot of other people will. I listened to Nine Inch Nails' album Hesitation Marks, which, as it stands currently, I think is the third best Nine Inch Nails album. A lot of people will come for me for saying that, for probably saying that Pretty Hate Machine isn't as good. To which I respond, that's a fair take. Pretty Hate Machine very specifically with me. I like that album a good deal. It's also just an album where I hear certain songs on it and I'm just like, oh, this is good, but also he just did this better on the Downward Spiral. And Hesitation Marks is something that I feel is a little bit more significant because it moves along the sort of like, we talked about the album Year Zero earlier this year and how that album is like, it was completely and entirely made on computers. It's a really dense and like noisy album that's just really like rough. And this album is a little bit more of a mixture of older Nine Inch Nails alongside that. And as a result, I think it's one of the most consistent efforts on the band's part. The only issue I even remotely have with it, honestly, is that I do think it is a little long. But I am sort of tolerant for that because, my favorite record from them is The Fragile. So
Yeah.
I kind of, my ears have sort of accustomed to listening for a long period of time. I just think Hesitation Marks is woefully underrated. It has like one of the lowest scores of any of their albums. And when I look at the songs that are on here, it completely fucking mystifies me. I think that Came Back Haunted is one of the best Nine Inch Nails songs. It's an absolute fucking rager. It's amazing. Copy of A, same thing, absolute fucking banger. And then there are songs in here like Satellite that are just fucking bizarre, and I love them. There's a lot of what I think is special about this album is that it's like a lot of the sounds do kind of sound a little bit like dated, especially with like some of like the synth sounds and whatnot. But the way that they're structured is that it sort of builds on top of those sounds and like crushes them by the end of each song. So it makes every song feel like you're slowly unwrapping a present. And for like the final 2 minutes of all of them, it's just like, yeah, it's dark as most Nine Inch Nails albums are, but like if I want to go to a casual listen of the band, that's probably the one I'm going to go to because The Fragile is a commitment, and it's also it's so diverse. It's got all of this shit in it, and it's great, but it's a commitment. And Downward Spiral is just so dark that sometimes I'm just like I'm not particularly in the mood to listen to that. This, on the other hand, is something that's a little bit more easy to approach, even if it is, still Nine Inch Nails. But that album deserves so much better than it got, really.
Yeah, a few things I want to add. I think you'll enjoy this little tidbit because I've referred to like my dad and my relationship with my dad off and on throughout the course of the podcast. But I would say like one of the most kind of like I guess biggest parts of our relationship in terms of like our mutual musical interests is like our both of us having an absolute fiery obsession with Nine Inch Nails, and like that being like a big point of like mutual love of music across my entire childhood. And I think you'll enjoy, Jake, that Hesitation Marks is my dad's favorite Nine Inch Nails album.
Based as fuck. Love that.
Even though
that's great.
Even though like the one we obviously spent the most time with it, well, while I was growing up was Downward Spiral, which my dad has on a beautiful gigantic vinyl that's just so beautiful. And
man, I mean, it's like he gifted you mental illness.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I mean, honestly.
And honestly, while I would probably still put Hate Machine ahead of it, I still completely concur with everything you said, Jake. It's a super underrated album. I spent so much time listening to it. Like when it came out, like in 2013, that was the kind of year where I was sort of getting really, really into music. And that year, 2 albums came out that my dad and I were from bands that my dad and I really, really loved, and we kind of like anticipated and then kind of like went through together. One was the Boards of Canada comeback album, Tomorrow's Harvest, and the other was Hesitation Marks. And I remember so distinctly when Hesitation Marks came out, we listened to it constantly. I mean, there's a chance it might be the Nine Inch Nails record I've even heard the most. Like that album just was such a fucking jam. What I think of it as, I think your reference points and comparison points are spot on as well, but I think of it as like a more successful execution of what they were trying to do on With Teeth, which is make this really kind of
I agree.
Like sleek, synth edged, but like with the distorted guitars, sort of like pop friendly sort of record. And I think that I often have conversations with our friend Zach, who loves With Teeth and will defend it to the hilt and like wants really for me to get on team With Teeth. And I'm like, I like that record, but whenever I think about whenever I think about what I want from that sort of Nine Inch Nails sound, I'm just going to go back to Hesitation Marks because it does it so much better. Copy of It is just an amazing song. Came Back Haunted is an amazing song.
Copy of.
I'm really partial to.
That's a top 5 Nine Inch Nails track for me.
Fuck yeah.
Absolutely. I think Came Back Haunted has a really great David Lynch directed music video that I recommend.
Ooh.
What else? Oh yeah, some really just deep cuts that I love on this album that no one really ever talks about, like Satellite. I really love.
Fucking Satellite is so fucking good, man. Oh god, I love that song.
I really love, like, I feel like a song like Find My Way is like the most perfect execution of that, like more low-key sort of ambient atmospheric side of NIN. I really love sort of deep cuts like Various Methods of Escape and Into. I think are really underrated songs. I even like have two, against my better judgment, I have a soft spot for the real sort of like pop major key vibe of Everything, which I realize is like a really hated Nine Inch Nails song by a lot of fans, but
it's a fucking banger, and I'm sorry people can't see that.
Yeah.
Simply correct.
Like the first half of that album to me is just like this amazing run of like really like exciting but also beautiful Nine Inch Nails songs, and then the second half of the album is like a really underrated sort of like vibey trip that I love. Like, it's just a really great record from front to back.
Agree.
And I just love seeing love for it because it is so underrated, and just so fucking good. I also want to say one more quick thing, which is that I have a version of their three most recently released EPs. I know Bad Witch isn't an EP, but I consider it an EP. I've taken their 3 most recent EPs and I've edited them and resequenced them into an album. And I want to share that with you guys because that, to me, I think is the best way to experience those. Because I'm like, I get why they released them as EPs, but also I'm like, it's so easy to just take these songs and construct like an awesome double album out of them. And I wish they had done that. But if that had been released, it would be like a top tier release for me. It's just those songs are just like not arranged in the way they should be.
I think the problem with that album, because that it really is just one album that they broke up into 3 parts for reasons, is just the rollout and the way it's formatted, and the fact that I think Add Violence is kind of lackluster overall.
I agree, actually.
But it makes all of it difficult to get into for me, because like to the degree that like those 3 releases are some of my least favorite Nine Inch Nails releases, although not my least favorite. Shout out The Slip, which is still good.
Yeah, the slip has still got some really great songs on it, actually. Like, I'll ride for
Tyler, you need to make those fucking 3 EPs a fucking record club or something.
I think the thing as well, I suspect that no matter what the context is, you two might not ever enjoy those EPs as much as I do. Because I just have a really soft spot for them. But the problem is...
Not the Actual Events is one of my favorite Nine Inch Nails releases, and I love Bad Witch. So
that's really good. Okay, cool. That's reassuring. The thing is, like...
It's just Add Violence that I'm...
I'd probably agree that Add Violence is the weakest of the 3. I really enjoy it. The issue with it is that aside from Less Than, which I think incidentally is like a top tier sort of like NIN single that would have absolutely slayed on any of their albums... The issue with it is, apart from that, it's all really like late album, low key, sort of like vibey tracks. And it's just like that. It just doesn't add up to a complete product of an EP. Like, it does feel like the middle act in a trilogy. And when I say like I have an album version, I haven't just like strung the songs together. I've actually resequenced the whole thing and changed a lot of placements. And I think that, I get why, I sort of do get why Trent did this in this way, but it's just like, I think that when you recontextualize some of these songs, I think even songs on Add Violence hit a lot harder when they aren't just like, when this low-key nature that they have, or this kind of really one-note, let's say monotonous tone that they have is the only aspect of the EP. It definitely drags it down a little bit. But yeah, I really, really obviously concur with the sentiment on Not the Actual Events, and I'll ride for Bad Witch as well, which is just, I think, really like, how would I describe it? Like kind of entrancing in a weird way. I love the weird sort of avant-garde jazz elements, but also just the kind of brokenness of that project. But again, yeah, I still feel like it's made stronger when you bring in those other songs. Anyway, that's a good discussion for another day. But yeah, you set me off on Nine Inch Nails. I could talk for fucking 5 hours, so I'm gonna stop.
Oh, I think we all could. I did listen to 2 projects from Frank Zappa I was really, really fond of. Unfortunately, August isn't here, and just because of stuff, I won't really mention them. But I listened to Overnight Sensation and Hot Rats. Overnight Sensation, fucking great. Hot Rats, fucking great. Oh my God, I'm so upset that I've slept on that album for so fucking long after hearing of how great it is. I mean, goddamn, that's just some of the best like jazz infused rock music I've fucking ever heard in my life. And Willie the Pimp is the greatest song of all time. And I can't not mention fucking, there's a song on Overnight Sensation, and I was listening to this album while working on my fucking shift. And I was just in the aisle putting away shit, and I think I dropped a box of cough medicine when I got to the track, is it Dynamo Hum, which I if you haven't heard it, you can't possibly appreciate the levels of unhinged debauchery that this goes into. It's like it reminded me of Star Sailor in how it's just pure unhinged horniness, but like with a story to it. And it's so fucking funny. Like instrumentally, it's also really, really compelling, but it's just this story about, like, in Frank's own words, trying to make a girl named Dynamo come. Cool.
Fuck yeah, bro.
Yeah, cool, man. But yeah, I listened to those. I think they're both great. For whatever reason, I listened to 2 things in conjunction that had a bizarre connection to them together. Is because we're going to cover Mastodon next week. So I want to go through their releases of theirs that I haven't heard, because there's surprisingly a decent amount of them. And I listened to Crack the Sky. And it's interesting. I skipped over Blood Mountain just because I wanted to listen to Crack the Sky, but I will revisit Blood Mountain, of course, because I really, really love those first 2 albums. Remission and Leviathan are my 2 favorites of theirs right now. But the thing about Mastodon is that, like, despite being like this, progressive metal, stoner metal, sludge metal band that has like just tons of shit that I really, really love, and like the core of their sound is great, and I just like, in theory, like everything about them, I haven't found the album of theirs that's like, yes, this is it for me. They're just a band I really like, and I want to find that album. Like, it could be Leviathan if I listen to it more, but and Crack the Sky, I actually kind of felt like similarly about, is that there's so much on that album that is so fucking good and fucking impressive and heavy and awesome and expansive. And it's like it's got a tight track list despite being long. But it's really good. It's really conceptual, got a lot of stuff in it. But there's also just some stuff in it that, like, it's not necessarily the album's fault. It's just parts of this band that I don't get along with. I don't know if it's a specific singer or when a specific singer does a specific intonation, but one of them has a voice that I just really don't like. It sounds like really generic sounding, and like really, like, it just sounds like generic post-grunge singer guy. And I'm like, I don't really like that one, dude. But like all the other ones I find are propulsive and kinetic and fiery and awesome. And he's on that album just a little bit too much for my liking. And it sometimes leads to them like just kind of pursuing like stuff that I think is a little bit more like, they just kind of bite off a little bit more than they can chew sometimes, but they're never not going like just absolutely stupid on whatever fucking concept they're trying to explore, or what whack ass riff shit. Like, a lot of Crack the Sky reminded me of like mid-era Opeth, which is, always a good thing. But I listened to that and I liked it a good deal. And I followed it up with, I don't know why I listened to this. Nothing prompted it. I was just like, it has been some time since I listened to Deja Entendu. I'm gonna throw that on because I like legitimately, I don't really know, like, it was just like, do my thoughts on this even hold up anymore? I don't remember. And short story, I mean, yeah, the album's fucking great. It's still great. Of their albums, I think it's like right in the middle, like the ranking for me, which is to say it's like a 9 out of 10. And like maybe on another day it could be a 10. But that album's so interesting to me because when I listen to it with older ears, it's like I hear all of these songs that I listened to and that I played like brand new. Like I'm sure we've all talked about this before, that the band Brand New have soundtracked collectively some of the most difficult points in most of our lives. And a lot of that album did for me too. A lot of the shitty parts of my later teen years were basically soundtracked by Deja Entendu. I think I've heard The Boy Who Blocked His Own Shot maybe 70,000 times. But you listen to these songs like the one I just mentioned, and you sort of stew in that kind of teenage angst, self-pity, depression shit. And then I really listen to the lyrical content of the album. And it's like, this album is a concept album about a character who is just a loathsome piece of shit. And it's so strange going back to that, because you hear the stories and the character being described in this, and you're just kind of like, wow, you fucking suck, dude. And it makes a lot of things a little bit kind of difficult. That first proper song on the album, Sick Transit Gloria Gloria Fades, is that's a difficult song to listen to for reasons I'm not going to get into right now. But it's still an album that's just peerless in terms of pure like poetic lyricism and just absolutely propulsive guitar work. It's a stylistic cousin of shit like Jimmy Eat World's Clarity. There's so many audacious song structures on that album. There's so many great moments that band just, they were on top of it since day one. And that is like a defining staple of emo and alt rock, and fucking every song pretty much whips.
Well, yeah, did also listen to Crack the Sky for the first time all the way through last night, actually. Just so high. And I was literally just laying in bed listening to it, absolutely baked, and just like whispering to myself like, Jesus fucking Christ, like every 3 minutes, because this band is always doing something that is just like, yes. Like every 3 minutes during that album, it did very much feel similar to when I listened to something like Blackwater Park for the first time. And I love Remission and Leviathan, and I really dig Emperor of Sand, even though most people are kind of mid on it, but they're also fucking stupid. So I don't know. So, but this is the one. Put the Mulholland Drive clip. This is the girl. There is a concept to this record. I'm gonna read from the Wikipedia page here, because this shit is. Anyway, there's a paraplegic, and the only way that he can go anywhere is if he astral projects, travels astrally. He goes out of his body into outer space, and a bit like Icarus, he goes too close to the sun, burning off the golden umbilical cord that is attached to his solar plexus. That's not where that goes. So he is in outer space, and he is lost. He gets sucked into a wormhole. He ends up in the spirit realm, and he talks to spirits, telling them that he is not really dead. So they send him to the Russian cult. They use him in divination, in a divination, and they find out his problem. They decide they are going to help him. They put his soul inside Rasputin's body. Rasputin goes to usurp the Tsar, and he is murdered. The two souls fly out of Rasputin's body through the crack in the sky, and Rasputin is the wise man that is trying to lead the child home because his parents have discovered him by now and think that he is dead. Rasputin needs to get him back into his body before it's too late, but they end up running into the devil along the way, naturally, and the devil tries to steal their souls and bring them down. There are some obstacles along the way.
Oh, hell yeah, man. I'll drink to that.
I fucking... What
Cedric
are
Bixler Zavala in the background just being like, I've taught them well.
what are you smoking?
I remember when I read that, listening to it, and I got to like, they put his soul inside Rasputin's body.
I'm like, hang on.
I was just like, we skipped 17 steps here.
So you can't just do that.
You know, and anyway, point is, you can just do that if you're going to make a record that sounds like Crack the Sky.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been, and I won't spend too much time on it, but this has been the week of Kayo Dot for me. A big part of it was really just wanting to have as much context as possible for the new album, because as you'll know if you've been watching this segment regularly, and if you have, by the way, fucking I love you. But if you've been watching the segment regularly, you'll know that on like a month by month basis, I've been like trying to get through the Kayo Dot discography slowly but surely. And I have been taking my time with it because these are records that you need to sit with and listen to multiple times and just absorb because they are unusual. So I've been trying to do that ever since April when I first got started with the amazing Choirs of the Eye. So I've been doing that, but I got to this week and I was like, oh shit, the new album's coming out. Well, and I was up to like, I had like 4 albums left and I was like, fuck it, let's just really throw myself into Kayo Dot this week. And so last weekend, right after we finished recording the podcast, I think, or soon after that, I immediately jumped in with Hubado, which is their 2013 98-minute opus. And that is, I mean, I'm not going to bury the lead. It is their masterpiece, in my opinion. It is an absolute colossus. There are parts of it I've described on Twitter as sounding as if you played Swans of the Seer and Swans to Be Kind simultaneously. That's an idea of how that record sounds, and in the sense that you have like just guttural, hellish noise and just nutso horns at the same time, and it's almost too much to take. It opens with this very controversial like 6-minute sequence of like death metal growls that are unaccompanied except for these kind of like scratching sort of guitar noise riff bits that people hate that track because I think it sounds so awful. I
had no clue that was a hated track. I'm just kind of like, I really like that song.
Me too. And it's like, yeah, it has these really strange and eerie, like, you know, unaccompanied growls for like 6 minutes. But then the last part of that song was like fucking insanity. But then the album, like from that point on track, and then you get to track 2, the album just hits fucking God mode and just fucking freight trains it. Like this is one of the most heavy records that Kayo Dot have made. And this is the thing with Kayo Dot, is that even still, there's a lot of dynamic range. Like every Kayo Dot album, I think, is defined by dynamic range. Like, yeah, you might have some of the heaviest shit they've ever done, but you'll also have some of the most restrained stuff as well. And Hubado's like this beautiful opus that flows through all these different moments. Just at the point where it's getting too much for you to handle, it'll peel back for a couple of songs. And it'll let you kind of catch your breath, and then it will throw you into just the most oppressive soundscapes possible again and again and again. And so this record just was absolutely a total trip. It took me a few listens to absorb it, and it is 100 minutes long. So obviously you'll have to have a certain level of investment to want to try this. But it does end with the 14-minute closer, The Weight of the World, which, I mean, if it weren't for Manifold Curiosity off of Choirs of the Eye, which is simply one of the 3 greatest metal songs I've ever heard, no cap. If it weren't for Manifold Curiosity off of Choirs of the Eye, Weight of the World would be the best song that Toby Driver has ever made. It's an absolute opus. It's 14 minutes of just the most impressive music ever, constructed by any musicians. It's just an amazing finale. It's like, it's like the different various things that came to mind while listening to it in terms of like amazing metal finales that give me a similar feeling. White Walls by Between the Buried and Me, The Pecantry by Deaf Heaven, The Apostate by Swans, like all of these different things. It doesn't necessarily sound like any of them, but it has the same sense of just like phenomenal ferocity and intensity and just perfection. So yeah, Hubardo, if you are game for 100 minutes, that'll fuck you up, then I recommend it. But if you're not game for that, I will also equally recommend a much more digestible release from Kayo Dot, which is the album they put out the very next year called Coffins on IO, which is a very, very different album. I would say the most unique release in the Kayo Dot discography, I would say. It is like a gothic synthwave album with very proggy tendencies and jazz influence as well. It is one of the most unique and entirely idiosyncratic albums I've ever heard. Like with most Kayo Dot records, it took me a couple of listens to really figure out how I felt, but I've come down on the conclusion of absolutely adoring this album. I mean like adoring it. Like this album, every time I listen to it, gets exponentially better, not just a little bit better, but exponentially better every time I listen to it, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually ends up being my favorite Kayo Dot record. It's just a bit too early to tell. But the opening track on this, Mortality of Doves, is like this 12-minute incredible, like burbling, slowly building kind of synth jazz prog opus that is one of the most impressive opening tracks I've ever heard. Yeah, a very, very strong record. I can't recommend it enough. It's a very good, it's only like 50 minutes, so it's more moderate. Well, you know what's interesting is that most Kayo Dot records are not that long. It's just that Hubardo is this really big opus that tends to give off the impression that Kayo Dot are really unapproachable, which is not really true, I don't think. They're fucking weird, but I don't really think they're as unapproachable as you might think. And actually, we'll get into this when we review it, but I actually think that their new album is maybe the best place in the Kayo Dot discography that you could start if you were completely unfamiliar with them, because it does so much of what they do in as accessible a fashion as they've ever done without compromising on that. But we'll get into that when we review it. Suffice it to say, the Kayo Dot discography is brilliant, as is the Maudlin of the Well discography. And I've said this on Twitter and I'll say it again, the Maudlin of the Well double album, Bath/Leaving Your Body Map, is the best release between either discography. And I bumped that to a 10 this week. It's 2 hours, but it's like 2 of the easiest hours of music listening you'll ever experience. Again, it's parts of it are challenging, parts of it are relaxing. Vast quantities of it are unfathomably beautiful. And we will be making a video on it within the next 2-3 months. So no, within the next 2 months. So yeah, look out for that. And if you haven't heard the Maudlin of the Well double album, please, I'm asking you as a friend / well, I guess whatever relationship we have, even if it's just mutual or if we have no relationship, I'm asking you.
Suck your fucking dick, dude.
I will suck any appendage for you to listen to the Maudlin of the Well double album.
Appendages.
Well, look, not everyone has a dick, so I'm gutted August isn't here because I also listen. Another huge highlight of my week is I listened to Vector's Terminal Redux, which is I mean, that I didn't, again, this is the fucking word sentence of the day because it's relevant to fucking everything we've talked about. It took me a bit to absorb and figure out where I was with this thing. But once I did, I was just over the fucking moon. And it's long, it's intense, it's abrasive, it's loud, it's a very high concept. Like it's like
as high concept as the fucking Mastodon shit that Morgan read out loud. You read the story to Terminal Redux and you're like,
yeah, it's like it's like that Mastodon concept meets like, I don't know, Claire Denis' High Life. It's this weird sort of like space melodrama sort of sci-fi shit. It's a lot. But it's a great fucking album. It's some of the best performed music of its metal of its kind that you could listen to from the last decade. I've only heard it once, so I can't really say too much on it. But
progressive thrash metal. Why is there not more of it?
Yeah, exactly. Like the thrash aspect was so fucking cool to have like heard a lot of prog metal, but to see the thrash aesthetics molded into that was like just fucking. It was just awesome. So yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today, actually. And Metallica has kind of always been a progressive metal band, like at least as far as like Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and uh, those real heavy hitter records go. Like, I mean, how many thrash bands are putting like the opening of Fight Fire with Fire on their records? Like,
That's
there's always
Rush.
that.
That's just Rush.
Yeah, but there's always that element to it, and like I think maybe maybe the most important band in the development of progressive metal is Metallica. So fucking everything we knew is a lie.
I would say, no disrespect to Black Sabbath, but I would say Metallica are the most important metal band of all time anyway. Which is not to say the most innovative necessarily, although they certainly were, but I think they're the most important culturally. So I would say it's not a stretch to say that they're
not a counter to your counterpoint, but my pick for that is Motorhead, because without Motorhead, there is no Metallica.
No, to be fair, I haven't heard
without,
so I need to do that.
Well, without Black Sabbath, there is no Motorhead. So,
I mean, yeah, obviously chain of influence, but it's not about, without this, there wouldn't be this. But I think just the flow on effect of what Metallica did within metal, outside of metal. It's like how, hate, like it or not, Eminem's one of the most important rappers of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And well, I guess that's really not a fair thing just to compare that to Metallica, but whatever, it's just true. Eminem and Metallica occupy very similar places within the cultural narrative of their genre. I know it sucks, but that's the world we live in. But anyway, yes, I think to return to Morgan's initial point, I think what maybe that speaks to is how inherently like integrative prog is. Like the nature of prog is that it brings together various sort of elements of rock music construction and as this sort of hybrid genre by its nature. So therefore it's very easy to see things like thrash and all sorts of like sort of predecessors or any kind of form of music that isn't just like rock music, isn't just kind of like conventional sort of verse chorus verse song structure, fitting into that mold because it is inherently in a relationship with that. Oh, one more thing I'll shout out is that I listened to, on recommendation from Zach, and I'm pretty sure also our friend Pokey Jam is a big fan of this. I listened to the
what act is Pokey Jam not a fan of?
True, but I mean, Zach and Pokey, I follow like 50 people on Rate Your Music, I think, and Zach and Pokey are the only two who have this album rated, and there seems to be like a not terribly obscure band within the realm of what we listen to anyway. But I listened to the debut album from a band called Planning for Burial, and they are a sort of like a slowcore-esque, not slowcore, like slowcore in the way that like Have a Nice Life is slowcore. Like they're actually a Flenser band, which is the record label that have released all of Have a Nice Life's records. And this record came out the same year as Death Consciousness. Not that it's really a very similar record to Death Consciousness, but they both have the same sort of like root DNA in the sense that it's slow, very miserable, minimal rock music that has that vibe, and also like distorted guitars as well. And it has more in common with the slowcore of like a band like Carissa's Weird, which is a band I highly recommend as well. In terms of like this particular brand of like minimal, miserable rock music. Carissa's Weird and Planning for Burial are both excellent bands to listen to if you are feeling like utter shit and want to wallow in that, or maybe you don't want to wallow in it, but you just feel like you have to wallow in it, and put on some music that lets you do that. And Planning for Burial's first album, Leaving, which is a great title for any album in this genre, is just as good a record as you could possibly get. It's frequently very beautiful, quite stunning. I even thought of Grouper to bring things full circle at certain points during this. Has that sort of drone, blissful, but also like quite intense energy. There are moments on this album that are kind of overwhelming in their emotional impact, while still like not doing a whole lot. They just refine the sound down to the point where it doesn't take very much to make you really, really emotional. I think it's even a solo project, so that's even more impressive. And I also want to shout out, like Carissa's Weird, this album has great song titles like Wearing Sadness and Regret Upon Our Faces, Memories You'll Never Feel Again, which is gut-wrenching. Oh, Pennsylvania, Your Black Clouds Hang Low. And my favorite song title, and also not coincidentally, one of the absolute best songs on the record, Being a Teenager and the Awkwardness of Backseat Sex. So yeah, this is a very gloomy, very dreary, shoegazy, droney, slowcore. I mean, it even has atmospheric sludge metal as one of the genre tags, and that's not entirely unfair either. So look, you'll know by this point if this is your bag or not. It's beautiful. It gets even better as it goes along. Very, very worth your time if you enjoy Have a Nice Life, if you enjoy Carissa's Weird, if you enjoy just the most fucking depressing music on the planet, then Planning for Burial, that's your bag. Thank you, Zach, for providing me with that, because I really fucking needed it. How sad is that? Anyway, that's what I've been listening to this week. Let's get into
really just on our shit this week.
Let's get into our first review of the day, which actually, it's good that we're doing this first because I kind of need to pick me up, and this will do it. The first album we're reviewing today is it's really fascinating the way that this band has slowly become sort of podcast core, with the exception of August, who I'm basically convinced will probably never like this band anyway. It's just not his bag. But this is a band who have been around for, I think, about 15 years now. They started as a quite lo-fi, sort of like neo-psychedelic folky, but also like quite with seeds of the ambition they would grow into within their early projects like Wagon Wheel Blues, their first album. Kind of realizing a sound a bit more with their underrated second album, Slave Ambient, which introduced, as the title might suggest, a bit more atmospheric tonality to their songs while still having this basic sort of heartland rock sheen running through it. And I became aware of this band around the time that their 2014 album, Lost in the Dream, was released. And that was, again, like not only a year or two after I started really following music. And just for some context, in case you weren't like following music at that time, when this album came out, it was a big deal. Like this album blew up in the alternative music sphere. It got like a massively praised review from like Pitchfork, from all the big important review sites. Like, this band essentially blew up with Lost in the Dream. And that record ended up being one of the records I listened to the most in 2014. And that record has a lot of very special memories for me. And in terms of like being at high school parties and commandeering the aux late at night when there were fewer people around and we're all just kind of like high and laying on our backs and playing a song like Disappearing or a song like Under the Pressure and just fucking leaving my body. Like that the experiences I've had with that album of just, it's the perfect, like with even though it's a very different album, I think of it in the same way I think of like The National Sleep Well Beast, in terms of just being like this perfect nighttime album where I can't even listen to it during the day, in stark contrast to their other records actually. But yeah, Lost in the Dream, that's a really special album to me. And when I think about a song like Red Eyes or a song like Ocean Between the Waves, like those feel like two of the most kind of anthemic and like amazing songs of that style of the whole 2010s. And so what I wasn't expecting is in 2017, when A Deeper Understanding, their last record, came out, for them to somehow exceed that, for them to somehow refine that even further into songs that were even more colossal. What it came at a slight cost was that it peered back some of the ambience of Lost in the Dream to have a bit more kind of heft to it, although you still had those beautiful kind of sonic passages and songs like Thinking of a Place and stuff. and they've still kind of managed that balance of like really hard hitting arrangements, but also this really serene beauty. And what they've slowly morphed into with each album more and more, and I think this really became apparent and like honed on Deeper Understanding, and is, if anything, like even more intense on this record, is that level of like studio production, just layers and layers of hugeness, of sounds that just like, again, you've got to either be listening to War on Drugs records with really good headphones or on a really good car stereo system. Only two ways to listen to it, because you have to be and experience it in some way where the sounds can surround you. And they really do. Like Deeper Understanding, I would say, is one of the best engineered albums of the last 20 years. It's just amazing. Like listening to it feels like I shouldn't be able to do this for free. Like every time you listen to it, it's like this, I should be paying to listen to this. So yeah, and I give all that context because I guess I'm the person with the most sort of experience with this band, and it feels quite important to sort of setting up what this album is and what the precedents that it has. And so the way that War on Drugs have kind of built their sound record by record. And I want to take a step back now and let you guys commandeer the first part of the actual discussion of this album. First of all, like give some context for how you guys came to be aware of War on Drugs, and then how this album relates to, sits with the other stuff you've heard from them, and what you think of it as a follow-up to Deeper Understanding.
I made a big deal. I like talked about it not too long ago on the show, but I made a big deal about when I first listened to, well, actually not first listened. When I heard A Deeper Understanding back when it came out in 2017, because that was like the summer where I was like fully, the first experience where I was like fully into music. And I played that album, and it just didn't like, I think it was sort of my lack of context and lack of just sort of knowing what to expect from that album that it didn't immediately hit me. I think at the time I was just into a lot of albums that were really immediate or heavy or extreme in some kind of way. And as a result, it just sort of like bounced off of me at the time. So when I came back to it earlier this year and listened to the Deeper Understanding, and if you discount the fact, if you discount new 2021 releases, A Deeper Understanding is my favorite album I've heard this year. For not like again for the first time, but just the album that I like the most, that I've listened to, that was not previously on my favorites list before, and I adore that record. It's been something I've leaned on multiple times this year. I listen to it all the time in the car. I bought it on vinyl. I fucking adore it. I really, really like their past projects, particularly Lost in the Dream, which is very, very good. And I have also listened to Slave Ambient, and that album is also very, very good. But you know, A Deeper Understanding sort of stands as the totemic high. And initially speaking, the first single released for this album, which I believe is the first track on here, I was a little bit nervous because it seemed very plaintive. It seemed very like, it's a very stripped back song, and in terms of like structure, it felt very monotone. It didn't really like showcase the audaciousness and the highs and lows that you would find on something like A Deeper Understanding, which is this incredibly like, to me, the difference between these two albums is that A Deeper Understanding is about reconciling sort of yourself and where you find yourself at a crossroads in the middle of your life. And that's why it really has those like introspective songs, but also those anthemic songs that feel like they speak to a part of you that maybe something else doesn't speak to as strongly. And it's all about trying to sort of root yourself and sort of that present moment and figure out yourself. And I Don't Live Here Anymore, as a follow-up, thematically speaking, is an album I find to be more about trying to escape, trying to find something new and to sort of get away with it, but like in a way where you're trying to balance out being constructive and trying to learn to be a better, more well-rounded person, but also in the respect that you don't want to run away from something instead of confronting it when that might be like the healthy thing to do. So in terms of like theme, I find it to be a really interesting contrast. And in terms of like quality and sound, I love it. I love this album. It's genuinely so terrific. I am like, a lot of it has been described. It's really interesting how this, I've seen like the press or like the music community at large receive this album one of two ways. The first way is this is the War on Drugs' most immediate album, which I agree with. And two, this album is boring yacht rock, which on the second point, I'm just going to bury this so I don't have to talk about it anymore. But what the fuck are all of you fucking talking about? I don't want to even get into the argument of like defining what even yacht rock is or whatever, but it's like the fact that someone could listen to this and find it boring makes me fucking astonished. The amount of huge distorted guitars and instruments that have a presence that is akin to Mount St. Helens firing off the most fucking the largest tar cloud in the history of mankind, and people can say that it's like boring. Like, I know we've already fought against the notion, you know, it's like another yacht rock band being Steely Dan, but it's just like the notion that anybody finds an album like this to be stock or boring or plain or whatever makes me so angry.
I was going to add one thing and then I'll go back again. I just want to say, if you use, I'm not saying either of you do, but anyone uses the term yacht rock as a pejorative, like as like an inherent negative, then you can just fuck off. Because newsflash,
it doesn't mean anything.
Well, no, I think, okay, as someone who has listened to a lot of music that is termed yacht rock, and look, I agree, that's a dumb fucking genre name. This is, I would say, as much of a yacht rock record as the War on Drugs have made. And I'll get into what my interpretation of that term is and how I think that applies, and how lazily I think Rolling Stone or whoever it was applied it as a pejorative when discussing this record. And I'll get into that later on. But this is a record where, when you think about those bands that are termed yacht rock, when you think about the attributes of those bands, where it is like layers in the studio, incredibly like perfectionist, every solo is like just, you know, done to the point where even there's not a single note out of place, the idea of like nothing out of place, no imperfections, all that sort of thing, like that idea of like everything being so refined. That's absolutely an apt description of how this record is made and how this record's set up and how these songs are constructed. And I don't know if you find that to be in some way like inherently boring or uncreative or lifeless, you know,
I find you inherently boring and uncreative or lifeless.
I just have to question. I just have to question what your standard is for good music. Like, what are you then judging music against if you don't value, like, you know, anyway, I'll get into it a bit more later on because I don't want to derail Jake. But that my point being, yeah, this is a yacht rock record. Why the fuck not? I think there's loads of elements of that. But stop using that as a pejorative. Stop saying like, oh, well, just because they have sanded off some of the raggier edges of their sound, maybe, which I don't know if I even agree with that notion. But even if they did, then I don't know. This band are on such a level of composition and of performance and passion that it just feels, it feels like it's in bad faith, frankly. And it feels like it's not really letting the record, it's not really giving the record the time of day that I think it deserves, that any album would deserve. So I think a lot of people are quick to rush to judge a band like this, especially with the perceived idea among like Zoomers and whatever, that this kind of music is like not really cool. But just, you have to engage with it, like, and you have to like treat yourself, you know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like I said, getting to listen to this feels like a privilege to me. Like getting to listen to music made this way, with this level of detail, with this level of incredible, like just immaculate construction. To me, it's like, it's a blessing. And like the idea, I don't know. I know that probably sounds ridiculous, but the idea that you, whatever, you get the point.
I know exactly what you mean because I listened to this on the long drive home from the other house that I live in. And the outro that's like 3 minutes long on Change comes on, and I'm just like fighting tears on the wheel just from the fact that music can sound like this. I'm just like, ooh, keep it together. Keep it together.
George
Yeah,
Clark and Sunbather screaming, "I gripped the wheel!"
Yeah.
like it's such a like and not to like focus on this aspect or anything, but I feel like it's so incongruous with that term that I feel like it doesn't fucking make any sense is what I'm saying, is that to like in the sense that it does mean that it's like yacht rock or whatever the fuck that means, but it's just like when I think of what that term means, I think, oh, this when someone labels something yacht rock, in my head that immediately goes, oh, you think that this is, or at least you as a person perceive this to be like boring Steely Dan adjacent shit. Not to say Steely Dan is boring, I'm saying that they think this. And like and as a result, like the term means something different than what it was actually, because like the notion of like the studio constructed thing, it's just like you're literally just using the wrong fucking words, and that doesn't it isn't anything what this album sounds like. Because if this album is, it's just like, you know, if you wanted to say that, it's like my immediate thought again is like, you know, early Steely Dan. It's just like, no, this album is fucking, it's heartland rock. This album is fucking Bruce Springsteen as fuck. It's just got like this neo psychedelic edge to it that makes it sound like modern and slicker. And it's like you have podcast favorite producer Sean Everett once again producing the album, who, my God, this, like, I don't know what exactly makes it different, but it's like there are two bands, in my opinion, that just know how to distort a guitar so that it sounds better than any normal guitar sound that could ever be conjured. And that's the Strokes and the War on Drugs. Because anytime they do it, I'm just like, oh, I feel peace in my soul. And you know, I will say the opening track is not my, it's not my least favorite song on here. It's not even a song that I dislike. In fact, I like it quite a bit. I've grown to like really appreciate it. Mainly because in the context of the album, it really works in like the flow of energy when it comes to like going from segueing from one track into each other, especially because this album, as I alluded to earlier, is like said to be the War on Drugs like highest impact, most immediate album, which I agree with, because after that intro, which is really plaintive, it feels almost like an interlude. It's just a, you know, it's like 4 minutes long, because the stretch of tracks that come after that are enormous. It's so huge, and it doesn't let up for a single second. I mean, basically the whole album just doesn't really run out of steam for me, frankly. Living Proof is a great song, like lyrically speaking. It's just a great way to sort of set that sort of tone, the sort of journeyman tone of this album that I really like. And it immediately goes into what I think is the best song on the album, one of the best songs of the year, which is Harmonious Dream. Oh my God, this is just, this song and this album are just, this is everything I could have wanted for the War on Drugs, for the band that made A Deeper Understanding. Every single instrumental quality of this song is just absolutely astonishing. It sounds so lively and beautiful, and I can't fucking get enough of it. I've listened to this song irrespective of the album itself dozens of times, and honestly, that's not the only song I can say that about, frankly. It's such a like, the way it just sort of builds into its fucking chorus, and it's so dense and layered, and like, oh fuck, I feel like I could just lose my mind describing every single song on here and how it sounds like it could move a fucking mountain. And you know, there's so many things on here, like the title track, I Don't Live Here Anymore, where it's got a fucking harmonica on it, and it just sounds like it sounds like it has enough weight to fucking steamroll over your house. I've never heard instruments used quite, or even there's songs on here that have shit like organ passages. It's fucking nuts the amount of instrumental variety that's on here. I'd say it's even a more varied record than the album before it. And even though I do obviously prefer A Deeper Understanding because, you know, I like maybe 12 albums in all of existence more than that one. Fuck. This, like, and it leads to simultaneously what is the greatest strength of this album and its greatest weakness for me is that Tyler actually alluded to something, is that like the sort of plaintive meditative moments that you would really come to appreciate on an album like Lost in the Dream, which is a sort of shift in direction for where they went after on A Deeper Understanding, where they do sort of steer away from that. And it's not an inherently bad thing. It's just sort of a choice that they made. And you can prefer one direction or the other. I happen to prefer A Deeper Understanding's approach. That said, it's not devoid of those introspective moments like Tyler alluded to. This album, on the other hand, I feel like does this change again, but even more drastic, to the point where its sort of run is just like so high energy, so at 10 the whole time. There are rare moments where it truly gets to come down and you just sort of appreciate the high that it took you on. Is that it's so easy to get swept up in the momentum. So it's like, on the one hand, it's a little bit less monotonous, it's a little bit less, or a little bit more monotonous and a little bit less holistic, but it's also, it carries itself in tone so consistently that I don't really have that much of a problem with it. The only real issue I have is that the final 3 tracks are all great songs. Actually, I'll exclude Occasional Rain from it because I actually genuinely think that's a great song. It's as good as basically everything else here. But the Wasted and Rings Around My Father's Eyes, which are really, really great songs that I like a whole lot, are not quite as good as the songs that precede it, in my opinion. And after the fact that you've gone through all of those songs, that are, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are in that one specific mode, so that when you get to the comparatively weak back-to-back punch of these songs here, it's a little bit underwhelming, just a tiny bit. But even then, these songs have enough instrumental detail for you to fall in love with them for any amount of reasons. I think this is one of the most well-produced and best sounding albums of the year. I love listening to it in my car. I love listening to it in general. It's basically everything I could have wanted out of a War on Drugs album. And look, this is not going to convert you if you're not a fan. This is not a new change in direction for them. It's if anything, it's them doubling down on shit that they've already done. But in that respect, I think it's sort of, you know, giving a fans what they want kind of thing. Again, if you're not gonna, if you want to get into them, it's a great place to start. But if you aren't into if you didn't like A Deeper Understanding, I can't imagine for a moment that you would feel any different about this. But that said, I guess that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I find it really poignant. I find it really great. But, you know, if there's one thing I think people might have a sort of stumbling block with, it's probably Adam Granduciel's voice/lyricism, which honestly are both a bit, I had a bit of a growing relationship to get used to and accustomed to either, because one criticism I can understand about this album less so, honestly. I think that A Deeper Understanding, it could probably be leveled out at them more, is that Adam's lyricism can sometimes ring as very vague. Like, a lot of it is just sort of general, and it's more focused on evoking a feeling and what that song is going to mean to you, and less what that song means. And you have to be good at that. That is an art in and of itself. But in some respects, it can make the lyrics feel like it doesn't congeal into a whole idea. There are songs on here that don't necessarily feel like they are about one specific thing or have a specific theme, but evoking a particular feeling inside of you. And I think it's actually a little bit better written than A Deeper Understanding in places. But that said, it also leads to a more specific vibe, whereas I kind of congeal with A Deeper Understanding a little bit better. So there's a lot up in the air as to whether or not this could even like hit with you. But if you're a fan, I don't know why this wouldn't like absolutely please the shit out of you, frankly.
A couple of things I'll say just to add to what you're saying, and then I want to hear from Morgan next, actually. But I just want to say a couple of things first. First is I concur with the lyricism. The lyricism is my only real sort of criticism of this record, but it's a criticism with a big caveat, which is that it doesn't matter that much, really.
Yes, exactly.
Because yeah, you're right. It's all about evoking a feeling and about, I guess, adding this additional layer to the music to really help emotionally guide you through it. And also the other caveat to my criticism is that Grand Duchiel does write from a very emotional perspective. Like I was listening to the last episode of IndieCast where Stephen Hayden and Ian were talking about this record. And this is for context. The War on Drugs is Stephen Hayden's favorite working band, and one of his 5 favorite bands of all time. And
that's not surprising in the slightest.
And so he's talked about how this something that's maybe overlooked somewhat is actually how much of an emotive writer Adam Grand Duchiel is, and how like deeply emotional the songs are. And I do want to acknowledge that because it's very true. And in many points, it's quite effective. I think slightly less so here than on the last 2 records for me. Like I think progressively I've gotten less emotionally out of Adam's writing since. Like I still find, even though Deeper Understanding is my favorite War on Drugs record, like it is for you, I still find Lost in the Dream to be the most emotionally hard hitting for me personally. And a lot of that is to do with the lyricism on that record. Yeah, and here it does feel like he leans into certain sentiments or expressions of a certain feeling that feel a bit rote for him by this point, like, and sort of feel a bit sort of like stock phrases almost that he's using, and it just detracts a little bit from that emotional impact. Again, there's still so much happening musically that gives you an emotional impact, so it doesn't matter too much. But if I am to focus on it, and I think I probably even like the song Living Proof more than Jake, but I will say that with that being the sparsest song on the record, and so the lyricism gets really front and center, it becomes, you know, an aspect that's a bit more apparent, and something where it is like, you know, I can't call the song amazing because of that, even though I think that it's a fantastic way of starting this album, because you think about all their other album intros being like, boom, you're straight into it. And here they ease you into the record, and it makes Harmonious Dream hit that much harder. But, and also there's just a lot of subtlety in that opening track that I absolutely adore, that I'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, it does make the lyricism's shortcomings a little bit more apparent. Like on a song like Victim, for instance, like he says, maybe I'm a victim of my own desire, like fucking at least 10 times, to the point where it kind of starts to feel like a bit of a cliche, which it already kind of is. But even though it's a moving sentiment in and of itself. So yeah, and I don't have a problem with his voice though. I love Adam Grand Duchiel's voice, I always have, and I think it's beautifully suited to the music that he
vocally
makes.
I think he's astoundingly compelling on this album. Like, again, it's very strange is that it's like when I say these comments about the lyricism and about his voice, when in comparison to A Deeper Understanding, I'm not saying them like one is better than the other. I'm saying that they're just very different. Yep. But this one I feel like shows off his vocal versatility a lot better. In fact, it actually shows it off better on Lost in the Dream too. Like, it's really good. And I find the writing here to be a little bit more specific, but I think it captures that pure emotional thing a little bit less, at least for me anyway. I can understand why someone would feel the opposite, frankly, because I love A Deeper Understanding just sort of because those, like, again, when I say those lyricisms kind of like general or even kind of vague, that's also not inherently a negative quality. I think that it's like, again, it allows you, it sets you up the canvas that you yourself get to imprint on. And it's about what the album gets to mean to you and your relationship with the music if you connect with it. That's just the kind of band that this is.
And the other thing I'll say is, on the note of the notion that this record kind of ends, you know, relatively weaker, is that the funny thing about that is I would actually say that is true of A Deeper Understanding, because I think the 3 songs I enjoy the least on that record are the last 3, even though they're good. Particularly In Chains actually is really, really great, obviously. But I do feel like that record almost like that album has 4 perfect songs. From the first 4 tracks are 4 perfect songs. And like that arc climaxes spectacularly with Strangest Thing, right? Which is, I mean, I don't know if it's my favorite. For a long time, it was my favorite War on Drugs song, and now I've gone back to Ocean Between the Waves, but who fucking knows at this point? And of course, those, and I don't know, maybe, I think you both agree with me that none of those 4 are even the best song on that album. So it's like an incredibly...
Oh, no, you're wrong about You Don't Have to Go. It's fine.
Okay, sure. Point taken. I do think this record ends a little bit stronger even than Deeper Understanding with Occasional Rain. I think it's...
yeah, it's a great song.
Oh, no, I'd say In Reverse is my favorite closer of theirs. off of Lost in the Dream, but I think Occasional Rain is a close second. It's a really good closer. So yeah, I would say that War on Drugs have kind of had this thing where I think with the exception of Lost in the Dream, their records do kind of like peter out a little bit, relatively speaking. So I kind of agree with that sentiment. And I think that it's probably for the best that this album is significantly shorter than Deeper Understanding was, for that reason. But yeah, anyway, I obviously have more thoughts on specific songs, but I want to hear from Morgan at this point before we steal all of the things that he presumably has to say. Morgan, I don't even really know much about how familiar and close you are to this band in the first place. So why don't you kind of talk about that in this record?
Yeah, well, I also found them through A Deeper Understanding in 2017 and lost my shit over that record. We went back to Lost in the Dream and did not like that record quite as much, even though I still think it's fucking excellent. It just never connected with me in quite the way that A Deeper Understanding did. In terms of the rollout for this one, I think Living Proof was a fucking terrible lead single choice. Makes no sense. And I think that song is like a 10 out of 10 fantastic track and a fantastic opener now. But the first time I heard it, I was expecting a War on Drugs song. And
Yes.
as a taster for the album that came, it left me like, okay.
Not even then. There's like 5 other songs on here that are just better single choices, like irrespective of the quality itself.
Like the one that they chose as the second single, which is the title track, which is my favorite fucking song of the year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why was that not your first choice?
I have to think that they made that choice with the idea of like trying to want to sort of undercut expectations a little bit and prepare people for a record that's a little more emotionally intimate, even though it still has that large gargantuan scope. So I think that Living Proof of a single is kind of more, I consider it a little more freely by contextualizing it with the other singles and saying like, yeah, it is definitely putting it first as a choice. But I kind of respect that in retrospect, even if it left me a little cold, because it was a way of saying like, hey, we're not, we're a little more, there's more to us than I think people, the general impression of what we do. And so I think that it was a nice sort of reminder, even if it did have me a little bit concerned as to what direction this was going to go in.
Yeah, but also I feel like what really plays into that is we had to wait like a month or two for the next one after that. So
yeah,
I was also like, what is this record going to sound like even? And lo and behold, it sounds like a War on Drugs record. And it sounds fucking fantastic, as we've already elaborated on.
An audiophile's wet dream, honestly. We can't undersell that.
Yeah, I think this album is stellar. Like all the way through, it's really not a foot wrong for me. I don't like Victim as much as all the other songs. It feels a little, I don't know, it feels kind of like they're going for something poppier in a way that works on the rest of the record and doesn't quite with that one. And on that note, this reminds me a lot of Peter Gabriel going into So from the the solo records that came before it, and that it's it's definitely a Peter Gabriel album, and there is no mistaking it for that, but it is also the most accessible version of that. I think.
You know what just occurred to me, like as a way of describing this band and this era specifically, is it's like Springsteen if he were produced by Daniel Lanois.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Holy shit.
I'm gonna pee my pants. And also if he wasn't as good of a writer, but that's unrelated. Anyway. Yeah, I actually find this, on that note, to be probably the most lyrically compelling War on Drugs album, just because this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it in that it does have songs on it that are lyrically compelling to me. like the title track and Living Proof. The draw of Lost in the Dream and A Deeper Understanding to me is the fact that music can sound like that, and it does.
Yeah.
And there it is, and you're just like, gee, wow. And that carries both of those records a long way, just as it carries this record a long way. But it does have those moments where I'm like, oh, there's actually an idea that I find really compelling here. But even then, I still don't know if I prefer this record over A Deeper Understanding. It's hard to say at this point, because at the end of the day, the last 2 minutes of Change says far more to me than most lyricists will ever say in their entire careers. And that,
yes,
and that has always been the draw of this band. And that's despite the fact that this is maybe more accessible and less ambient, and there's no 12-minute songs on here. Despite all that, this is still very much just the war on drugs. They have not compromised anything, in my opinion, and they're just as good as they've been for the last couple records, and maybe even better for me. But again, it's early days. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I'm stunned we've really gone this long without talking about that title track, which
Jesus
is
Christ.
like,
oh man.
And I don't say this as a detriment to the record, but to the rest of the album, but like, it is such a good song. It's such a classic song immediately that it's almost to the album's detriment in the sense that no other song can approach its level. Really, like, and there's plenty of great songs on this record, but there's nothing that hits the level this does. Again, like I said, it feels like a classic song, like in a way that
fucking
maybe
drum fill at the beginning, the
yeah, it feels like a classic, like pop, sort of like heartland pop rock song in a way that I don't think they've made since Red Eyes for me, which is, again, not a disparagement of any of the singles on the last album. They're all amazing 10 out of 10 songs, but like the kind of instant hit immediacy of this, I guess Holding On would kind of have that
for all
quality
intents
as well.
and purposes. It is their Born to Run.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't, I'm trying to, yeah, it's almost like, I would say Red Eyes is their Born to Run. I would say Holding On is their The River. And I would say
this is their Dancing in the Dark.
Yeah, I think I was heading in that direction. I think this is their Dancing in the Dark.
That Springsteen run too is so highly comparable to this album run as well. You can come up with like perfect parallels to that discography, I bet.
Yeah, 100%. And 100%. And look, I think one of my favorite aspects of this record is the way in which, again, the dynamic sort of range of these songs. Like, some of my favorite moments on it are songs that start in quite a sparse place, but build and construct and become something
I Don't Want to Wait.
Massive.
Mm-hmm.
I Don't Want to Wait. That's my second favorite song on this record after the title track. I love the gentle drum machine intro to this song, just the space it puts you in. And then when that synth comes in,
and it just builds and builds.
Like, when I first listened to this, I knew to do this, when I first listened to this, I said, my first listen to this, I'm going to go and drive around. It was like 11 p.m. at night. I said, I'm going to go and drive around, chuck it in the aux, listen to it. And I'm going to drive through the city. I'm not going to go into the countryside or anything. I just drove through the city, listening to this album. And I was like right in the middle of the city when I Don't Want to Wait came on. Like, people like drunken students like fumbling around the streets, and like everything was all lit up. And I was listening to this sort of melancholic song, and I was like, oh, this is like amazing. When this song started, and with those synths, it was putting me into this like place of just like bathing in gorgeousness. But then the song just like builds and builds, and it has this chord progression I love during the chorus, where it's just like so upbeat and like beautifully sort of surging and optimistic, and sort of for a war on drugs chorus, like it pulls you up, like, I don't want to wait. It goes up and across, and it's just such a great little chord progression. It's so uplifting, but also like kind of pulling you in. And I love that. It's an absolute standout to me. Change, a big grower as well for reasons Morgan stated. That song is amazing. Other big highlight for me, though, for similar reasons, in the sense that it starts so understated, but becomes this blossoming piece of amazing songwriting, is Old Skin, which, I mean, just an absolutely stunning track. I adore this song. I like how, again, when you think about War on Drugs as this kind of studio construction band, where like you have layers and layers and layers of sound, and each time you listen to a song, you can focus on a different layer and get a whole different world out of it, and then listen to it again and focus on a different layer. And I think what's cool about Old Skin is the way that it adds in those layers gradually, builds these different elements of the instrumentation, and slowly let you feel the impact of each of them as they come in, as opposed to just kind of hammering you from the start. This track, Victim also has this, but this track much more prominently has a harmonica solo that is just honey. It's so good, and it's in tandem with these radiant sort of organ chords, and one of Adam's most urgent vocal performances on the album. Like that, the parts on this record where he really gets, like, he really sort of strains his voice, and he really like puts himself like into this place. Like you do hear the limitations of his vocal range when he sort of strains himself, but he manages to turn that into something that works to his advantage as an emotive performer. And so that's just really smart and powerful and great. He's never going to be for everyone, for sure, but I think he does remarkably well with the limited sort of tool set he has vocally here. He does remarkably good stuff with it. I love that aspect of the songwriting and construction. I want to sort of shout out a couple more sort of details I love. The opening track has really grown on me to the point where it's one of my favorite songs here now. I love the analog tape hiss that is present across this whole track. Like immediately it's the first sort of thing you hear, and I like the tape hiss is actually almost feels like it's been raised in the mix to really emphasize the sense that you're in the room with Adam. And for this sort of intimate beginning, it's really, really quite, with headphones especially, it's very intimate. It sort of gently eases and lulls you into the album before he even begins singing. And just little details that I only discover on my like fifth listen, like how the opening lyric is banging on the drum, and it just has this gentle little bass drum hit when he says it. It's just this great little detail, little drips of organ and subtle backing details that elevate this above just being a mere acoustic ballad. I mean, those piano chords are just so gorgeous and full of light. Like when they come in, they're so radiant. And you just have, again, like just little gentle cymbal taps that build up the song up slowly and make the entire album feel like it's just gradually sort of opening itself up to you like a flower. I love, love, love how understated the solo is, the guitar solo at the end of this track. Like at first, it's just a single sort of bent note that's repeated, and then it kind of just, it's so focused on texture and sound. Like it's not about melody, it's just about texture. And the way that the guitar is played to just twang on a note and just kind of really turn it into something textural. It's really lovely. And like, again, audiophile stuff through and through. And it is like, again, there's a lot of elements of this album from the production standpoint and from the guitar standpoint that are very reminiscent of yacht rock to me, of the style of music that, you know, the 70s style of music where the studio as a machine became this incredibly powerful thing that certain bands like Dire Straits and Steely Dan and a number of other bands were really using to their advantage. And I think, yeah, this is a Heartland rock record through and through, but it's equally Heartland rock and psychedelic rock and yacht rock to various extents. It just has the DNA of all of those things melded into it to varying degrees. And that's one of the great attractions of it to me, is the way that it feels like it's channeling aspects of all of those genres and the music that they're rooted in. And I think that as someone who has a real like just weakness for that style of music where it is like incredibly tightly produced, where the focus on guitar tone is like Kubrickian in its intensity, like to the point where you can imagine like spending months trying to get the tone right and the effects right and the level of distortion right. And I think, I mean, it's meaningful to what kind of band this is. Like if you think about their last album cover, Deeper Understanding, it's just a photo of Adam in the studio. Like, and I love that as an album cover. And this is like, and this record is like almost trying to make a point of distancing from that in a weird way, like with the photo of him sort of like cut off from the head in the snow with like a cup of coffee or whatever. Almost like it's trying to suggest that he's sort of opening up in some way or kind of like stepping out, but yet the studio as a presence is more integral than ever. So yeah, I love that aspect of the War on Drugs sound. I love that they lean into it more and more with every album. The synths, I don't think haven't mentioned much yet, but the synth playing, keyboard playing, the general electronic elements that are integrated on this record sound fantastic, in tandem with like that gorgeously rich synth sound that's beautifully encapsulated in a song like I Don't Want to Wait. Like the defining aspect of War on Drugs at this point to me is the guitar tone, that like distorted, really kind of twangy tone that they use. It feels like the distortion, if anything, has been upped on this record more than ever before, like to the point where you can hear it sort of like adding a additional layer to most of the instrumentation. Like it's really apparent on songs like Harmonia's Dream, I think, and later in the record on the songs like Wasted as well. For most of the record, I think that level of distortion is really, really prevalent. But the fact that this record could still be described as polished, and you might, you know, conventionally think of polish and sort of distortion as being these kind of opposites, but this is a great exercise in how you can take like a tool like distortion and use it to enhance the serenity and beauty of the sounds you make. And War on Drugs are doing that better than any band I can think of right now. It certainly helps that they presumably have the budget to be able to do that, because that's the other thing, is that this is obviously a record that has cost a lot of money to make. These kinds of records don't get made by indie bands because they just can't do that. So it's another reason why it's like I feel so privileged to even get to listen to a band like this, because it feels like this is like I should be, like this should be a special subscription service. I have to cheat my way into a 7-day trial to experience, because it's not good enough for the free platform. Like that's like it's
to me, it's the same appeal as like. It's the same appeal as shoegaze, honestly, is that like, not in like that it sounds the same, but to me, it's that every second of this album feels like it was slaved over. And you've got all these things like we're talking about yacht rock and heartland rock. And like, if somebody who isn't into this band is listening to us describe this, you're probably wondering, what the fuck does this sound like? If it's got all this electronic synth and shit, but it's also got this like heartland rock stuff. And my only way I can describe how this appeals is that it's perfectly synthesized to the point where all of the electronic stuff doesn't feel like it detracts from the rootsiness of the heartland rock stuff. And it's all put together in the same way we can't with other music. To me, that's what the appeal of shoegaze and bands like Slowdive are, is that isolated, all of these things are like good and whatever, but it's the special alchemical synergy of when you combine all these things together that makes something super beautiful and compelling and commanding, that one label of something like yacht rock or even heartland rock or whatever, it just doesn't do it justice. It just sounds fucking beautiful, man. That's the only way you can really say it to give it its proper due.
I 100% agree. I think that's a really good point to emphasize. Favorite tracks and ratings then for I Don't Live Here Anymore. Jake, lead us off.
Gotta go with my 3 favorite tracks being Harmonia's Dream, I Don't Live Here Anymore, and I was going to say Occasional Rain, but I think the stronger song for me is probably Change. And I also love I Don't Want to Wait. I just love the way that, like, you know, it's got those sort of programmed drums and just they kind of get swallowed by something that sounds so much more organic and beautiful. Oh God, every song here is structured flawlessly. Least favorite song, full discretion, I don't have a single song here rated below an 8 out of 10. This is one of the most consistent albums I've heard all year. So this is, you know, take this designation with a grain of salt, is that I think my least favorite song is probably Wasted. Still a very, very good song. And I give the album an 8.5 with room to grow.
Yeah, my three favorites are the title track, as I said, favorite song of the year. I would say it's not likely to be dethroned, but the fact that something dethroned the title track on Pressure Machine is like whatever. So
Yeah.
At this point,
2021, you motherfucker.
And then I will also say Change and Occasional Rain. Least favorite, I'm in the exact same boat as Jake. In fact, the Victim, I will say, is my least favorite, and it is at a 8 out of 10, and it is the only one at an 8 out of 10, and an 8 out of 10 is the lowest this record gets. So 9.5.
Beautiful. My three favorite tracks are I Don't Live Here Anymore, I Don't Want to Wait, and Living Proof, actually. Least favorite is probably Rings Around My Father's Eyes, and I am going to give the album an 8. So that is an average of 8.7. Hell yes. Okay, let us know what you think of the album, how you think it compares to the other War on Drugs records, and we'll move swiftly along into our second main segment of the day, which is Kayo Dot are I believe the Brooklyn-based project of one Mr. Toby Driver, a musical magic man who has kind of been the driving force of this project over its many years, its many iterations. Lots of members have come and gone from this sort of collective that this band sort of is. It evolved out of the dissolution of the project that came before it, a project called Maudlin of the Well, which released a double album 20 years and like 2 months ago, called Bath/Leaving Your Body Map, which remains, in my opinion, one of the great records of progressive music in any form ever, and a record we will be talking about on this podcast within the next 2 months, incidentally, to celebrate that anniversary somewhat belatedly. But that project sort of dissolved, and Kayo Dot became the new sort of manifestation of Toby's artistic and musical impulses, which have varied quite strongly in many different ways over the years. One of the sort of, I guess, unofficial philosophies of Toby's, I think, with each Kayo Dot album is to make a record that doesn't sound like anything they've done before, while still, being a realization of the musical niche that they occupy. So yeah, there's plenty of records that they've made that could be equally described as like avant-garde metal, even elements of like gothic metal, prog metal. But each record is its own sort of standalone vision that has sort of relationships with earlier works to some extent, but also is its own thing through and through. Like Toby's not an artist who is interested in repeating himself or interested on being like mindlessly nostalgic, which makes this an interesting record because this is actually a reformation of the lineup of Maudlin of the Well. It reunites a number of musicians who are involved in that project with Toby. One of the most notable is the presence of lyricist Jason Byron, who has provided lyrics and vocals on numerous Kayo Dot records, as well as Maudlin of the Well, but is here writing all of the lyrics to this record, which I believe are all sung exclusively by Toby. I don't think Byron sings on this, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kayo Dot fans, if you're watching. But in many ways, for an artist like Toby, who is so averse to nostalgia in terms of repeating himself, and this is, to be clear, not like a repetition or anything, but it is in some ways a sort of celebration of Toby's and the band's sort of musical roots, while also feeling very much of a piece with the direction in terms of composition and sort of general sound that Kayo Dot have moved in recently. They seem to have kind of moved past the sort of synth wave flirtings of records like Coffins of Io and Plastic House on Base of Sky. With their last record, Blasphemy, they moved into sort of more of a prog rock influenced direction, which had mixed results for me. I'm not a huge fan of that album, but it felt like they were still trying to carve out a new niche within an existing genre, trying to explore, use the tools and I guess aesthetics and frameworks of a genre in ways they hadn't been used before. And so it still feels like with each album, whether, and again, like I say this as a huge Kayo Dot fan, some of their records are kind of mid to me. I don't enjoy all of their albums. And I don't think that the experimentation or the musical ideas always necessarily completely hit the way that they all could necessarily. And I think that's somewhat a cost of being so relentlessly exploratory and adventurous and trying to make, different combinations of sounds and styles of composition. It's just a fact of the matter. But with this new record, Moss Grew on the Swords and Plowshares alike, it does really feel as though there is a honedness, if that's a word, to the compositions, to the way that they're constructed. There's a focus. There is an establishment in some familiar aesthetics that will ground most listeners, I think, while still challenging them. I think the biggest, most challenging aspect of this record, like a lot of Kayo Dot records, is just how unusual the compositions are from a construction standpoint. One of the defining aspects of Kayo Dot song construction is you have these wacky chord progressions, like just not so chord progressions that go sort of just feel like they are to a certain extent almost purposefully being obtuse, like purposefully
almost not even progressions at times.
Yeah, like they will sort of, but what's beautiful about it is that they are still progressions, but they kind of still do resolve themselves and become satisfying, but they make you kind of work to find that in the way that a lot of my favorite artists do. And so I think that their ability to craft really unique chord progressions that become satisfying in terms of the way that they eventually circle back, resolve, the way they utilize repetition, the way they utilize an absence of repetition, and the way they utilize, guitar tones, sound, instrumental tones, palette, all of this sort of stuff. It makes music kind of hard to talk about, hard to describe without sounding like a fucking obtuse weirdo. But it makes the experience of Kayo Dot, at least for me, quite satisfying the more time you spend with it. And I think that's absolutely true of this new record, which I would say, if you're looking for an intro to Kayo Dot, for something that is not too overwhelming, then I would say this is a pretty good starting point. I think if you
100%
are more into kind of like the avant-garde sort of prog metal side of things, you probably want to start with something like Choirs of the Eye, which has a bit more of that kind of like, less of the real sort of like throw you for a loop chord progressions. But this, I think, is a great balance of the sort of different dynamics of Kayo Dot in terms of the softness, the loudness, the intensity, and also a great showcase of Toby himself and what he can do as a performer. There's a lot of vocal variation on this record. There is Toby in his most aggressive mode ever on certain parts of this record, like Get Out of the Tower and the opening track. And then you have a more plaintive Toby in songs like Void and Virgo, which is one of the best Kayo Dot songs ever, in my opinion. You have a lot of this sort of dynamic range happening within the band themselves and within Toby, to the point where it feels like, to circle back to how I started this intro, it does feel like this band coming full circle in a certain way and showing how much they've developed in terms of performance confidence, willingness to experiment with the different ways that their instruments and vocals can sound, and also the ambition of the compositions themselves. Because one thing that's worth noting is that, most Kayo Dot records are shorter than 45 minutes. This one runs a full hour, so it's one of the longer records they've made in a while. I mean, if you think of Hubardo as a kind of outlier, which I think it kind of is, then this is definitely like them reaching for a more sort of outwardly, overtly progressive song construction than they have in a long time. And that, I think, works for me greatly to the album's advantage. These pieces having the time to really flow and settle and change and develop, and even all these sorts of things, like letting these pieces run for 8-9 minutes, sometimes even longer, really lets you inhabit the space that they create. Because with those weird angular obtuse chord progressions, with the weird guitar tonalities and strange instrumental incorporations, it takes some adjustment. And with their last few records, it's almost felt like the second you sort of start to get used to that within a song, the song is over and the song hasn't really fleshed out into something. That was an issue I had with Blasphemy in particular. Whereas here, it feels like every single piece here, even the shortest piece, which is probably my least favorite track, but still has a lot about it that I love. Every single piece here feels like it throws you into the soundscape. It introduces all these different elements. It brings them all together. It pulls them all apart. And by the end of it, you've had enough time to adjust to what it's doing, to let it sort of set in, and to then, if you give it enough listens and you're able to sort of get on board with how the band operate, to sort of really groove into it and, like, you know, get a lot of satisfaction out of it. So that, I think, is a great strength of the album. And that's kind of my broad opening sort of statement / essay, as I love to give opening essays, but I feel it feels particularly pertinent for Kayo Dot, considering how much time I've been thinking about them lately. You know, I was worried when I saw the new Kayo Dot record coming out that, you know, considering how, you know, I don't feel amazing about their more recent output, would this be something worth even covering on the channel? And it would suck if it weren't, considering how much I've been talking about this band. But thankfully, it feels like a really satisfying tying together of stuff from the early years of Kayo Dot with the way they construct songs and compose now, with also, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll really emphasize it, some of Jason Byron's best lyricism ever. The poetry that he writes, it's just often quite difficult to make out, especially if it's being shouted. Although, again, the moments, I think Toby is generally pretty intelligible for most of this record. But the poetry itself is beautiful. It's not so obtuse as to just be meaningless, like some sort of black metal, you know, extreme metal poetic lyricism can sometimes be. I think that the lyricism, once you have it in front of you, is actually not that difficult to sort of see what's being expressed and the feelings that are being expressed. And incidentally, you know, more so than I would think is even normal for a Kayo Dot record, this is one of their darker albums in terms of subject matter. It features a song that I think I might tentatively call the most miserable and oppressively sad song Kayo Dot have ever recorded, which is The Necklace, and I'll get to that in a while as well. So this is a really kind of not a great record. I'm sorry, it is a great record in my opinion, but it's not a great record to put on if you're feeling like particularly, I guess, emotionally volatile and need to not be pushed further in that direction, because it is, you know, without overtly being about it, like a lot of records that the Jams and Tea podcast has cataloged, it does feel like a response to the state of the world at the moment, obliquely, not directly. It has to have been influenced by that. But yeah, I want to take a step back now and hear from both Jake and Morgan, context for you, how you approach this, and your experience listening to it.
This is my first experience with Kayo Dot. I'm still at the point where every time I read Toby Driver's name, I sing it in the tune of Baby Driver by Simon and Garfunkel, because I have trash brain. Yeah, I this didn't do over much for me. I found it, I mean, it's certainly interesting. It sounds great. The musicianship is on point. All of the performances are there, but it just seemed to be very firmly not my bag. I think in particular the song "Brethren of the Cross" was a song where I was just like, "Fuck it, what?" It just all kind of washed over me in a way that I found somewhat frustrating. But it's not without its moments. I think the last track in particular is really strong, as well as the first track, now that I think about it. And Void and Virgo was also cool. So I would definitely say this is a good album to me. It's just not one that necessarily, you know, We did not hit it off, so to speak. There will be no fuck. Jesus Christ.
You're ghosting Toby Driver. Like you're you're going to,
I wouldn't.
you're having dinner and you're like, I just need to go to the bathroom, and you're not coming back from the bathroom. It's over.
No, I would
Toby Driver.
Yeah, I would say this is more like we went on that dinner, we said goodnight, and the next day I'm like, yeah, I don't really see a future here. Best of luck in your future endeavors.
No, it's more like you really have a really great date, you hit it off, you have great conversation, and then you go back to the apartment and the sex is just the most lackluster sex you've ever had in your life. And it's such a letdown because it was going so well. And then like this very vital element is just like completely a non-starter. And you're like, well,
just no chemistry.
Well, shit. And I'm not just wishful thinking here. I do genuinely think that the earlier Kayo Dot stuff, well, the first Kayo Dot album, and particularly the Maudlin of the Well stuff, is more Morgan adjacent, very different stuff to this. But I was thinking in advance, I could see you going either way on this, so I prepped for this outcome.
Yes, and you could see me going either way, and I went both ways, as is my wont.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are a podcast full of people who love to go both ways.
Well,
so there we go.
Me in particular, I'm definitely going one way, and that I unsurprisingly pretty much agree with Tyler as to my feelings on the album. I'm also the longest storied Kayo Dot fan here, so again, that's also even less surprising. And I mean, it's true what Tyler says when he says that it's just like, oh, I imagine you liking the other Kayo Dot albums more. It's like, this isn't just a desperate ploy to get Morgan to listen to more Kayo Dot music. It's like literally, as Tyler stressed in the beginning, none of these fucking albums sound the same as the other ones. I mean, like, it's just astonishing how different all of these projects are. I mean, if you gave me this album and Choirs of the Eye and then told me, yeah, this is the same person, I would be like, I don't think that it is. I think you're trying to fool me.
You must be mistaken.
They can dance around. They both dance around like the for kind of avant black metal thing, but like it's such a wide genre umbrella that it almost becomes meaningless when you talk about this kind of music. But the thing about it that took me off guard was kind of, as Tyler alluded to earlier, it is how accessible I found this. Is that, I definitely think the individual who listens to this, it definitely depends on how familiar you are with things like this in this genre. But like, if you are typically speaking a black metal fan, I think this is going to play to you like pretty simply. I mean, sure, there's a lot of interesting chord progressions here. There's a lot of like synth tones and stuff that you just don't find in this genre. I think particularly on the song Brethren of the Cross, like From the Outcome, there's just, or even not even Brethren of the Cross, The Knight Errant too. They both start off with these passages, these synths that are just so like wow, wow, wow. They're kind of groovy and funky.
Yes, I love that keyboard tone at the very start of The Knight Errant. I mean, it continues throughout the song, but when that comes in and that melody that it plays, it's so like it's one of the most immediate examples of like, it's one of the most immediate openings to a Kayo Dot album to me, in the sense like I'm immediately in it, and it's great.
Oh yeah, from the very beginning, it lets you know what kind of album this is. And just as like a little bit more like it's blending a lot of things. It's like one of the few things I would label as like, if such a thing as progressive black metal exists, then this is it. I think what's so interesting too is that like there are parts, like the vocal variations from the lead vocalist here are so different, not even just like on a song by song basis. It's like even in songs that'll, like, again, The Knight Errant is a song that has two completely different vocal timbres interacting with one another at points that are just kind of astounding. And like one of the things that got me so like caught off guard was songs like Brethren of the Cross, where I can literally only describe what the vocalist is doing as it's just Roger Waters. It's like Roger Waters was singing on top of a black metal instrumental. It's fucking insane. I mean, it just sounds like
if you don't eat your meat.
I mean, look, there are definitely points where like he's kind of yelling in that kind of same register thing, and it works. And yeah, the thing is too is that they're only, yeah, it's an hour-long album, but it's also only 7 songs. So each song here feels so distinct. And what I think is so awesome about that too is that Tyler kind of alluded to the fact that you sort of live in these songs for enough time to get, accustomed to their progressions and digressions and everything that they do and their palettes and what makes them different from one another. And not only are they consistent, but to me, it's that the amount of time that it lets you sort of stew in them helps, because this is, lyrically speaking, it is dark and it is like a very vivid record. But what struck me is that the sense of like direct storytelling on here is super duper strong. Like the best way I can appeal this to somebody who may be like, oh, this is kind of like esoteric and you're describing it weirdly, is that like if Dark Soul is a black metal album, this is that album. It's got lots of like stories in here. Like the opening track is talking about like dragons and shit. It's very like medieval high fantasy kind of stuff, but like they're simple stories, but the emotional complexity of which they are told with is what makes them both unconventional and exceedingly very, very dark. And sometimes you can't make the vocals out, but for what you can make out, and for what little of the lyricism is posted up and online, you can still like get enough out of these tracks to find the stories that are found in these individual songs, which I find really refreshing and really, really rewarding. And yeah, just the way everything is blended here, it's way more overtly progressive than it is avant. So if you're a fan of the band's older work, this could completely go over your head, frankly, because the appeal of it is totally fucking different than something like Choirs of the Eye or Blue Lamp and Seen Downward. It's like miles away from that. But what gets me here is just the solid fundamentals. You feel like these people are working in perfect clarity of what to achieve with each song here. And like the black metal, the tremolo picking is really solid shit. But like I think the structure is just also really, really strong. I really love how each song not just sort of flows into each other, but flows in and of themselves. There's like it definitely does take a little bit to get used to, just because this more accessible sound almost feels like wrong to be listening to, in a sense. When you're listening to Kayo Dot, you're just kind of like, this feels like weird, and it like runs the risk of feeling like, oh, is this like them watering down to widen their appeal? But no, this feels like a sort of career summary of them using all of these individual elements to present to you something that is a little bit easier to get on board with. And as a result, it's like one of the better like black metal releases of this year. I'd say I'd put it up there alongside something like the new Wolves in the Throne Room, as being identical in sort of appeal to that record. But yeah, I just think this is a really solid release, and I'm excited that like maybe if the reunification of Kayo Dot means that they'll take their sound in a direction that's like this but different, just because that's what Kayo Dot do. They're not going to do the same thing twice. But I love the sort of winding groove of something like the closing track, which is just fucking excellent. Et epis fuck, I keep trying to pronounce or to like practice saying this, and I say it quietly and then I can't say it out loud. Episikidian, which is just fucking fantastic. It feels like a highlight reel of this record, which feels like a highlight reel. Like each passageway of this song feels like a different part of the record specifically, and it's just a great way to tie it all together. It's just one of the most, not to make a pun about it, but it's one of the most colorful black metal albums I've heard in some time. And that's sort of the appeal here, is that if you get along with this genre, I don't know how long, like if you like black metal in general, there's no telling to see if you would like Kayo Dot, but there is certainly telling that you would like this album. So,
Yeah, I would back up basically all of that. And I think that in many ways it feels like this real, again, sort of realization of some of their most just finessed and filled out compositions. And I think I just basically all my favorite pieces of Kayo Dot tracks are the longest, the tracks where they really go long and where they really build a world. And this feels like an album essentially exclusively of those songs, with the shorter track, which is still 5 minutes, Spectrum of One Color, kind of in the middle as this kind of fiery, I guess centerpiece thing. But what I want to kind of like try. It's very difficult. I don't think I have a really strong handle on exactly what this album is about or anything, but I think I have a handle on some of the sort of ideas and feelings that are explored. So I want to just kind of touch on them a little bit. The title itself, Toby has said, is it's about the notion of like forsaking war for peace and good deeds. Moss growing over the swords and the plowshares, these symbols of war and these symbols of, I guess, agriculture, just say that, in the end, we all experience the same fate. So it's a kind of like sort of fatalistic and sort of sentiment perhaps, but it represents, I think, the sort of mindset that the record exists within, which is this kind of very sort of dark sensibility where there is, again, this sort of rot that is spreading indiscriminately that will affect everyone in some unstoppable way. In that sense, I feel like a sense of like the impending doom of climate change as the sort of subtextual element to this record, with the nature references in that title and some of the lyricisms as well. To me, I think that feels like what it might be rooted in. But yeah, there is a lot of lyricism here that deals with sort of death and dying and rot and religion and all those sorts of typical sort of textbook metal subjects. But Jason Byron, the lyricist, approaches it with the real kind of poetic sensibility. I think that this is really felt in Void and Virgo in particular, which is, as I said, one of the best Kayo Dot songs ever, I think, and certainly my favorite song on this record. It has one of the most subtle and satisfying developments of any Kayo Dot song. It never dramatically changes anyway, and I don't think that, well, basically no song on here has a dramatic change at any point. It's just a subtle sort of build that these songs sort of have. But Void and Virgo, I think, executes it in a particularly sort of tasteful way. It's not terribly oppressive. It's reasonably welcoming as well. I think it was released as a single, which is a really wise choice, I think, because it's emblematic of a lot of what makes this record comparatively approachable in their discography. But also there's just some incredibly vivid writing and lyricism and the sort of oblique storytelling of this record. Again, the nature references: a forest of treetops bend their neck before you. The river, sharp and wild, straightens its course. Strange eyes peer out from beneath a weeping willow, from doors high in the trunks of the mightiest pines. They watch the hills part ways to ease your passage, the breeze to blow back against the ridge and the elms. So you get a sense of nature and the world as a kind of breathing organism, or like collective of organisms that is this encountered by the sort of unnamed sort of female protagonist. This the chorus of this track actually is weirdly, I think, about as catchy as Kayo Dot, Have You Forgotten, with that repeated refrain of she lay down at the top of the mountain and was nailed upon the quarters. She lay her down upon a stone and suffered the stroke. So yeah, this figure essentially being sacrificed, and that is the subtitle of the song, The Nature of Sacrifice. It feels like a piece about some horrible sacrifice being made to appease some kind of ugly force that is corroding the world. Yeah, it's very, very sort of unsettling and dark, but the song itself is so beautiful in the way that Kayo Dot is beautiful, not in the way that conventional music is beautiful, but its development is really, very pretty and lovely and quite powerful. I think the guitars just really soar on this track. The vocals are cleaner than they are on other parts of the record, but there are moments with it where Toby really manages to sound so tortured, and it's sort of less complicated in its beauty than the band usually are, which I think really allows it to stand out, but also without losing that uniqueness in construction and song arrangement that just defines Kayo Dot. I can't get enough of it. I think it's one of the best songs of the year. I've been listening to it an awful lot. But even the other moments of the record where it's sort of less friendly and more kind of just violent and in your face, like Brethren of the Cross. The word I would use to describe this track is disorienting, especially in its first half. And honestly, I think the more that you re-listen to Kayo Dot, certainly this has been my experience, the more you play their records back, and I think it's very true of this record, the more your brain just kind of eventually gets rewired to adjust to the strange and unusual and often frequently shifting ways that the band actually keep time within their song. Like, I'm not a music theory expert, so I can't like listen and immediately track it, but I can tell that there are frequently shifting time signatures, sometimes within a passage or a measure, and it really leans to this disorienting feeling. But I think when you get used to that and the way that Kayo Dot use that, it becomes less of a kind of barrier to overcome and more of a kind of sweet joy of the way that they arrange their songs. And the riffs themselves remain thrilling. I love in this track how the midsection develops. Like it's almost as though the song becomes less intense as it goes on. The vocals kind of fall away a bit in the second half of this track. And the band just developed this tone, this tonality that feels like a boiling storm. Every instrument is a cloud in this thickened sky of sound. There is a great grumbling, distorted bass riff in the last couple of minutes of this track that gets countered by this eerie keyboard melody and a post-rock guitar melody while that drummer is just going fucking ham until the song just stops. Night Errant, already been mentioned, fantastic opener. Love those keyboards and distorted guitar, love the way that they sound together. The grumbling and growling bass, just the counterpoint, the way that these musicians play off each other is so just so rewarding and rich. I love the way that this song fills out into these spacious sort of synths and gorgeous soundscapes while still maintaining the intense riffs. Again, that 8-minute runtime really allows that to flower, and it becomes as immersive and thrilling an atmosphere as the band has conjured since Coffins. Spectrum of One Color, I think, as I said, shortest, most inessential song here. But that said, I still really love it. I love the chunky bass work that's happening here. Actually, and it could just be the week that this happened, but the bass tone and the chunkiness of it reminded me a lot of the bass tone and the chunkiness on the new Porcupine Tree single. Funnily enough, it has the same sort of sound. You have this intense burst of sickening energy in this song that just goes so quickly that it's easy to forget it's still a full 5 minutes. I love the way the song breaks down in its second half into this groovier, more lumbering place. Get Out of the Tower is the most intense and aggressive track here, both in musical approach and vocal performance. I'm not as in love with it as I am with the other tracks. It doesn't feel like it quite has the sort of beautiful dynamic variation that the rest of the record masters. But that's not inherently bad. Like, it's certainly not a problem for Kayo Dot to just go fucking ham on a song and not let up. They've done that on plenty of songs. But in the context of this record, it's just a bit, slightly a bit much for me, especially with coming after Spectrum of One Color as well. It's just, I wish there was a little bit more, I guess, subtlety and the intensity of this song. That said, though, then you have The Necklace, which, as I alluded to earlier, is one of the most oppressively dark Kayo Dot songs in a long time, maybe ever. It is a song about suicide, where Driver's anguished vocals are just like so difficult to listen to. And he is just kind of repeating and intoning these lyrics about cut down her body and wash it, her broken heart, her broken soul, an empty hole deep in the confines of the spirit. The center of the loop is universal gloom. Like this really fractured image of this person sort of hanging themselves. Whoever said this was the coward's way out, black dress dying, she wore, leap of faith off of kitchen chair, every last one of us will see you there. Like really difficult lyrics. And just the sound is so hard to listen to as well. Like, it's so gloomy. One thing that I found curious was when asked to describe the sound of this record, I think Toby Driver called it gothic metal more than anything else. And I think that sense of, you know, oppressive darkness, not to reuse the same words again and again and again, really is a dominant feature of this record in particular relative to other Kayo Dot records. And it finishes beautifully with Epipsychidion, which is like a kind of victory lap for the album that executes everything about it again so well. That intensity, that beauty, that apocalyptic fire that Kayo Dot are able to do to really give it the storming conclusion, and then falling away into these just amazing pillowing waves of guitar distortion in the last 5 minutes of the song. I absolutely love, and I love that this section goes on for as long as it does too, because it really feels like a come down where you're just kind of like taking a breath after the real sort of nightmare escape that this record has put you through. I love this album. I think that it's a triumph for Kayo Dot while also being just relentlessly bleak. I want to shout out as well the album cover, which is amazing. One of my favorite album covers of the year. I think maybe actually my favorite album cover of the year. It's actually a painting that Toby did himself. It's gorgeous. It's this radiant mixture of greens and blues and these sour sort of morose colors, this decaying landscape with this kind of hell pit underneath it, and the sort of roots of the nature above kind of reaching into it. And it's just like really evocative in a really powerful way. And it feels like what I hope to get with a kind of avant-garde metal album cover, is that I should be able to feel like it makes sense when I'm listening to the album. And I think this really, really does, more so than other Kayo Dot album covers. So that's just a smaller detail, but one that I really wanted to mention. But yeah, I can't get enough of this. It's been a really rewarding treat this week, and it's made for a lovely capstone on my journey through the discography of Kayo Dot. And I'm glad that we got a chance to review it. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it. I'm glad I'm not the only person who really likes it, because that was a big concern of mine. And yeah, good stuff. Well done. Good shit. Love it. Favorite tracks and ratings for the new Kayo Dot album, Moss et al. I'll go first.
What?
Moss et
I said Moss et al, but I should have said Moss etc. Because et al is the wrong Latin.
I think we should just call it Kayo Dot's album Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah. Elizabeth Moss has a sword, something like that.
badass.
I want to plow Elizabeth Moss, something like that. My 3 favorite tracks on the album are Void and Virgo, The Nature of Sacrifice, Epipsychidion, and it's really tough between the first 2. It was Brethren of the Cross like this morning, but I'm going to switch to Night Errant just because those keyboard sounds are so fucking good. And it's such a great, it's probably, think on it for a couple of seconds. No, it's not my favorite Kayo Dot opener. That's definitely the first track on Coffin's Vio, but it's my second favorite Kayo Dot opener in their whole discog. And least favorite is, it's probably either Spectrum of One Color or Get Out of the Tower, but I still really dig those songs. And I'm going to give it an 8.5.
My 3 favorites are the last track. I'm not fucking saying it because it's not a word. Fuck you guys. At Kayo Dot, not the 2 of you. If it pips a pip to doodly do.
Episcopalian.
Yes. My second favorite is Night Errant, and I will also say Void and Virgo. Least favorite, probably Brethren of the Cross. Firmly not for me, that song. And I will give this a 6.
My 3 favorite tracks are Epipsychidion, Get Out of the Tower, which I didn't emphasize how fucking fiery and intense that fucking song is. Really love that one. And yeah, probably Void and Virgo. Least favorite is probably yeah, Spectrum of One Color. Just kind of lets you spend the least amount of time with that one. And I give the album an 8.5 as well.
Okay, that is an average of 7.7. So we had an 8.7 and a 7.7 today. Hell yeah. Whatever that means.
My neck has disappeared.
Let me know what you think of this album, this new Kayo Dot record. What's your favorite Kayo Dot album? What's your relationship with Kayo Dot as a band? We do want to hear what you think in the comments below, especially if there's anything you feel like we haven't quite touched on. Hit us in the comments below. Same goes for the War on Drugs record as well. If you have additional thoughts on that, we want to hear from you. We're going to be back next week to talk about the 90-minute Mastodon album, but make sure you stick around for Tuesday's video, which will be on Linkin Park's Meteora. So that's going to be a fun one. And as always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, forward, go further.